Welcome to the LSU Sports Insider podcast, brought to you by the journalists at The Advocate, NOLA.com, and the Times-Picayune. My name is Perrin Keyes. I'm the executive sports editor. I'm joined today by Wilson Alexander. He's our lead LSU football beat reporter, and by Scott Rabalais, our venerable longtime columnist. These two gentlemen will head up to Columbia, Missouri here shortly, where the low temperature will be 40 degrees on Friday night. And it'll be about 60 degrees, I think, right at kickoff time, which is at 11 a.m. So it'll be an early kick between LSU and Missouri. And maybe that's something that the LSU fan base will look forward to, actually, given how well LSU played in its only other 11 a.m. game this season. That was the big win against Mississippi State. So a lot to get into here, gentlemen. I hope you guys packed your sweater vests and tweed jackets and ascots. I hope you're ready to go.
I can't wait for some cooler weather. It's going to be such a relief.
Football weather. Finally, some football weather, and it's not exactly what you think of as classic foot. It's just hard to take Missouri seriously. I'm sorry for football.
You should take this Missouri team seriously.
You may do so at your own peril.
Yeah, no, that's true. This year is true.
Yeah.
Sure.
So a lot to get into here, and we'll get into all of that, obviously. But a bit of business here first. If you're tuning in, you obviously know that the Advocate's always been known as the number one destination for LSU football coverage, and this is just one more great way for us to bring our coverage to you. You can subscribe with our print edition. You can go to theadvocate.com/subscribe. That's our print edition, our digital edition. Also, if you haven't already, go get our newsletter. Subscribe to our newsletter. To do that, you sign up at theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. Get all the latest headlines straight to your phone, straight to your inbox, straight to your desktop. That's theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. Okay, so gentlemen, LSU opens as a 6.5-point favorite against Missouri on the road. Early kickoff, that has been bet to 5.5 points. The over-under is 64.5, and if you spent any amount of time here in Baton Rouge the last few weeks, I'm going to guess that you'd be surprised and stunned if that game doesn't go over. LSU's reeling on defense right now. They're 117th in total defense, 429 yards a game. 108th in scoring defense, 31 points a game. It's not just one thing. It's not just the pass rush. It's not the run fits. It's not the secondary. It's not the linebacking unit. It's everything. LSU's defense is a mess right now. There's no other way to put it. So the first question we'll put to you is, can the defense get fixed this season? Wilson, we'll start with you.
It can marginally improve. When you say fix for an LSU defense, my first thought is to actually become a dominant unit again. Rab has talked about this before and written about it, how you're used to this reputation of an LSU defense for basically its entire history as a program of being very, very good. And the last couple of years, it hasn't been that way. And this year in particular, it's not. And so, fix is not going to happen this year. That's something that's going to take some time and certainly have to be more thoroughly addressed in the offseason. But there are little areas where, and maybe some schematic change they can change, things they can do to change and become at least average or slightly below average, which frankly might be all that this team needs if it can just make a few more stops, because this is an offense that is potentially going to be the second best in school history by every statistical measure. And so the things that they can do to get that way on defense is just fundamental tackling. Brian Kelly said that LSU charted 34 missed tackles for 284 extra yards against Ole Miss. That is wild. Just fundamental, on that regard. Bringing more of a pass rush, however they choose to do that. Just sending 3 and 4 has not gotten there on a consistent enough basis. Teams are getting the ball out pretty quick against LSU at times, but even when they're not, they're just not getting home to the quarterback. So you've got some talent there, and Brian Kelly said this week that they're going to look at some different things to try to maximize the talent they have on the defensive line. And so those would be where I would start. Is there's a talent deficiency in the secondary that you're not going to change this year, but if you can at least shore up the tackling, bring your defensive linemen just simply closer to the ball, because they're playing like a yard and a half off the line of scrimmage at times, and maybe somehow find a way to, whether that's schematically or something else, create a pass rush, you can at least get to an average place.
Rab?
To Wilson's point, the defense just needs to get a little bit better, and to pair with this offense, which has performed so well. Imagine, if you will, if they could eliminate, and this is just theoretical, could have eliminated all those missed yards missed tackle yards. Ole Miss had 706 yards total offense in the game. That would have been 422. And that's still a lot, but it would have been enough probably for LSU to win the game because LSU's offense performed so well, scoring 49 points. They had over 600 yards of offense. And what you ended up with, of course, was the most points LSU's ever scored and lost in a regulation game. The defense, you can't trade for players. You can't bring someone up from the minors. You got what you got. And of course, you've lost some key pieces along the way, or never had them, like a J.K. Johnson, who transferred in from Ohio State and played in the secondary. He's probably not going to play this season. Of course, Greg Brooks, unfortunately. But they talk about scheme, and they talk about pad level and that sort of thing. And they brought in Pete Jenkins, of course, the defensive line whisperer, to be a defensive line analyst. And there's been some shifting. Fate has done LSU no favors on defense, with Jimmy Lindsey, the defensive line coach, being falling ill in August, and now Greg Brooks. But they're only going to get so much better. And if they can just be. Can you imagine if they could just be slightly above average? I think that would serve LSU quite well. But are they going to get much better? No, I don't expect it. I think, but you can expect people like Harold Perkins and Savion Jones and Mason Smith to start playing, even Mekhi Wingo to start playing a little better than they have to this point.
One area that you mentioned, or Wilson, you mentioned tackles. One area where they maybe can get themselves from below average to even close to average is third down. You've both discussed this in previous podcasts. Matt House, this was a point of emphasis for the defensive coordinator, Matt House, going into spring ball, going into preseason camp. There was something that he thought that they could be a whole lot better at, getting off the field at third down. They were 79th in the nation last year on third down defense at 39%. They're 120th now on third down defense at 47%. And Wilson, you noted that against Power 5 opponents, basically not named Grambling, they're actually doing better. Opposing offenses are actually doing better on third and long. They're almost at 50%, or right at 50%. You had a story at theadvocate.com this week on third down defense for LSU this week. What did you learn, Wilson?
That it's atrocious. I mean, it is shocking. It is shocking that you look like in the flow of a game and you're watching, and an offense gets to maybe 3rd and 3 against LSU, 3rd and 4. Yeah. You feel better than when it's at 3rd and 10 plus. Yeah. The only game in which LSU has been good on third down and long, or really just good on third down in general, in the Power 5 games, is Mississippi State. Mississippi State got off the field. LSU, prevented them from picking up a first down. Their first 9 third down attempts. Mm-hmm. And a lot of those were like 3rd and 11, 3rd and 10, even a 3rd and 17, I think, at one point. That hasn't happened consistently throughout the games for a couple of reasons. One, they're struggling immensely with mobile quarterbacks. Will Rogers was a statue in the pocket. That was also a Mississippi State offense that is they're completely transitioning from the air raid.
That's right.
And all these other offenses, they've had their schemes in place now for a few years. And so there's a lot going on there, but with a quarterback who wasn't creating with his legs in any way, LSU was just able to pin its ears back, tee off, get after the quarterback. That was maybe going to be the recipe for this defense in general this year, was a good front seven with some great players like Mekhi Wingo, like Mason Smith, who just hasn't returned to form since his injury. And then, like Harold Perkins in particular, we're maybe going to be able to bring pressure, and they haven't. And so then on third and long, when they're not getting after the quarterback, you're leaving your secondary in a tough position. They're playing really soft coverage. It'd be really interesting to see if at any point LSU gets away from some of the zone stuff that it's running, because it just hasn't really worked to this point. A lot of passes that have just been thrown between guys, kind of right at the sticks, or finding that soft spot in the coverage. But at the same time, you can somewhat understand what the thought process is, because they don't have the dudes back there to maybe just line up and play man. So a lot of things kind of going on at once. The missed tackles has contributed to that on third and long, where guys have been, there's been some moments like where LSU's made plays where they've tackled someone short of the sticks and forced a punt. But then there's been a ton of other times where they've missed a tackle, allowed somebody to pick up the first down, and a drive keeps going. So all sorts of things, basically everything that we've talked about in terms of what is wrong with this defense, manifests itself the most on third down, because that's the situation where more than any you have to get off the field.
Certainly poor tackling, as you mentioned many times. We know the coaching staff is aware of this. They obviously see it. Number one, this is their livelihood. They're obviously going to be paying close attention to this times 100, however much more they can pay attention to this more than we can. That's how much attention they're paying to it. And they're trying new things. Frankly, they tried some new hands on defense. Against Ole Miss, a 55-49 loss. They tried Ashton Stamps on one corner. They started him there. LaTerrence Welch was very quick to come off the bench. Denver Harris did not dress. Linebacker Omar Spates. I'm sorry, Denver Harris did dress. I'm sorry. Who am I thinking of?
Deuce Chestnut.
Deuce Chestnut. I'm sorry. Deuce Chestnut did not dress. Denver Harris did not play the first quarter. Yep. And then came in the second quarter. Linebacker Omar Spates was back in the starting lineup. He had a hip flexor injury. He'd obviously had a nice career at Oregon State before he transferred in here. And Whit Weeks played a good bit, but probably not as much as we all expected him to based on what he had shown the previous two games. So they're aware. They're trying new things as much as they can try. The question then becomes, should there be any more personnel changes, and what would they be if there were?
For me, it's two things. It's Jordan Jefferson and it's Deshaun Womack, where Deshaun is not at this point in his career a three-down player. He is got a good ways to go in terms of developing, but we saw him flash as a pass rusher 5 snaps against Arkansas, and he had a sack, and he was making an impact. He was getting after the quarterback. And it's perplexing. Brian Kelly was asked this Monday, is he available? And Kelly said yes. He did not really elaborate. He wasn't asked why Deshaun didn't play defensively against Ole Miss. So there's probably more that we need to find out about that. But that one was perplexing because you saw someone who played good in a very short, a very small, sample size against Arkansas, and then just wasn't part of the game plan against Ole Miss. And then Jefferson, is somebody who has been a really consistent player for them at times this season. He's flashed and he's done some great things. And when you've got Mason Smith coming off this ACL and then an ankle injury in the preseason, and just not yet getting back to what we know from Mason Smith as a freshman, what LSU even saw from Mason Smith in preseason practice last year before he got hurt.
That's right.
Is why would not try something else? Get a little bit more of a rotation going. Mason played a ton. We've seen him have fairly early in games, especially against Ole Miss, which runs so fast and goes up tempo so quickly. Hands on his hips, breathing really heavily. You've got a guy there with a lot of experience in Jordan Jefferson. Why not play him a little bit more? Those would be the two that, if you're looking at some personnel changes, like you said, you can't bring in anybody else in the secondary. You have who you have back there. But there are some players up front that could make sense to get a little bit more playing time as LSU moves forward. And maybe they can make somewhat of a difference.
Yeah, they actually, to me, maybe have more players available to put in a rotation, as Wilson said, than you thought they would in the preseason. I mean,
certainly on the defensive line.
And Whit Weeks is someone who's obviously given them some great time, and Womack and Braden Swinson and Andre Sam and Ashton Stamps. These are players that you didn't know they'd be able to count on before the season, and they are. It's maybe eventually they'll hit on the right combination, but Brian Kelly keeps talking about playing the inexperience card and everything, and they have young players compared to last year's secondary. These were veterans, Garner, and
which is not entirely true.
No,
we'll get to that.
It's not entirely true, and to that I say these guys have played football before, right?
That's right.
Because sometimes it looks like they haven't, So, but defense, as I always say, is about chemistry as well. I mean, look at the chemistry on offense. Jayden Daniels said it himself this week that he said, we've been together for a long time. We have experience in this offense, and they know each other's moves basically, and that's manifested itself in how well this offense has done. So maybe they can eventually hit on the right combination, but they're trying. I mean, and it's worth remembering. Everybody wants to dump on Matt House, the defensive coordinator. It's worth remembering they won some games on defense last year. They won the Arkansas game on defense. They made key stops in other games. They held Ole Miss and Arkansas held Ole Miss and Auburn down once they got leads on LSU when allowed the offense, which wasn't performing as well last year, to catch up. So it's it's a combination of things, and that's why there's not just one quick fix. And that's why I think if there was a quick fix, they would have done it by now. And obviously, it doesn't exist.
One thing I would point out, we've heard the explanation, younger players this year. We've heard the explanation, new players this year. Neither of those, frankly, hold a lot of water with me. And I'll tell you why. As you mentioned, Deuce Chestnut this year, he transferred in from Syracuse. He'd had a lot of experience. Andre Sam, he had a lot of experience, albeit at Marshall and McNeese, but he had experience. J.K. Johnson, of course, he had the leg injury. We probably won't see him this year. Zy Alexander, he had experience, albeit at Southeastern. Denver Harris had come from Texas A&M. I know the coaching staff said that they wanted transfers who had more than 1 year of eligibility this year because they didn't want to have to do this revolving door in the transfer portal. The fact of the matter is, for one reason or another, these transfers have not turned out as well as last year's transfers in the secondary did. Jarek Bernard Converse from Oklahoma State, they only got 1 year out of him, but it was a good year. The same with Mekhi Garner from UL. The same with Joe Fouché from Arkansas. So, they frankly didn't do as well as in the transfer portal this year, certainly at least on defense, as they did the previous year, the first year when they were coming in to establish the program. This is the LSU Sports Insider podcast, brought to you by the journalists at The Advocate, NOLA.com, and the Times-Picayune. You know where to find all our writers' great work. That's at theadvocate.com. If you want to subscribe, by all means, please do so. Go to theadvocate.com/subscribe. That's theadvocate.com/subscribe. And get a hold of our newsletter. Rab handles that 3 times a week, but it's a daily newsletter. To sign up for that, get all the headlines straight to your inbox. You go to theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. That's theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. So we spent a lot of time this week so far and here on this podcast today so far talking about the defense and the issues that it's facing. We haven't really gotten to the offense, which has earned every bit of credit that has come in their way. To finish up on the defense, though, with respect to this game, LSU is going in to Columbia, Missouri to face actually what's one of the best passing combos in the nation. Brady Cook, the Missouri quarterback, he has not thrown an interception this season. He's something like 75% completion rate, 11 touchdowns, no picks. Cody Schrader, their running back, he's in the top 25 of the nation in rushing, 5.7 yards per carry. And Luther Burden, the wide receiver, their number one wide receiver, is actually, I would say, excuse me, as good as any number one receiver in the nation, up to and including Malik Neighbors. Wilson, what's going to make defending Luther Burden in particular so difficult?
Oh, man. So Missouri gets sort of like Malik Neighbors, where the LSU moves him around and finds different ways to get him the football. Missouri does a good job of that. You'll see him on go routes where he's just taking the top off of a defense. You also see him on some short, quick throws to just get him the ball in space and let him work. It's going to be an absolute handful for LSU to try to defend him. You could even say it would be a burden, which I just
come on, man.
I'm sorry. He is a really talented receiver. 644 yards this season, leads the country in that regard, just ahead of Malik Neighbors actually. And Brady Cook isn't necessarily an explosive passer. He hasn't been just like, but he's been real. I mean, he's been good. I mean, like he's got I think 1,400 yards. Obviously, a good chunk of that to Luther Burden. And like you said, he's just been efficient with the football. He's been smart with the football and hasn't gotten them into mistakes. And so it's going to be really tough to defend those two in particular. Missouri, in terms of like the advanced analytics, hasn't been a great rushing team, but it might not matter in this game because of the problems that LSU has in the secondary. The way it looks like on paper, Missouri's going to be able to score quite a few points, and so LSU's going to have to do everything it needs to offensively, like we saw against Ole Miss, and then some, in order to win this football game.
The one caveat you can say about Missouri is that they haven't played the schedule that LSU has played. Yes, they beat Kansas State on a last-second field goal, 61-yard field goal as time expired. Their one SEC when LSU's played 3 SEC games. Their one SEC wins over Vandy, who obviously is usually at the bottom of the SEC East, and they've just kind of gotten by in most of their games. But you look at how LSU's played on defense, and you look at some of the things Wilson's talking about on offense that they do and do well, and they it's a formidable challenge, and to expect anything but a shootout again on Saturday. Their defense isn't great either. They give up like over 240 yards passing per game, and you would expect that LSU is going to be able to exploit that too. So to expect anything but a shootout is, again, is kind of silly. But it was, I think, a 35-31 game last time LSU went there in 2020. And LSU still sitting on the 1 yard line, trying to get in the end zone for the winning touchdown. Maybe they could do it this time, but it might well be a last team with the ball again kind of game.
Which was exactly what the LSU Arkansas game was, and that's what LSU was, I think, trying to accomplish against Ole Miss. Second to last possession, they wound up stalling out and having to punt on fourth down, which actually we'll get to fourth downs later. But, one way or the other, this looks like yet another game, as may every single LSU game from here until the end of the season. Looks like a game that LSU may have to outscore the opponent in. And that brings us obviously to the offense. Coming out of the Ole Miss game, silver lining again for LSU is the offense and just how spectacular they were. Jayden Daniels, 414 yards passing, 4 touchdowns. The offense averages 8.5 yards per play. Some of those deep throws to Kyron Lacey and Brian Thomas you could not have handed them off any better. We'll just say, the offense is humming, almost like no other offense in the nation, really. And I would say, to the question that I would pose to you, sort of with that in mind, Wilson and Rab, I'll let Wilson go first, is just what's sort of been the most pleasant development the last 2 or 3 weeks for the LSU offense?
Well, in terms of development, it would be 2 things over the last, I guess, 3 weeks. You could say 2 things. One would be the emergence of the deep passing game. Jayden Daniels fully unlocking that. You didn't really see it. It wasn't quite clicking against Florida State. Some moments against Grambling, but still a little bit off. And in the last 3 weeks, they have taken off in that regard. LSU, get this, and it's mostly because of the passing game, is 3rd in the country in plays over 20 and 30 yards. It's 4th in the country in plays over 40 yards. Those were areas in all of which LSU struggled last year, and that was the big emphasis coming into this season, was getting more explosive. LSU wanted to do a few things in that regard. One was just having receivers improve in their terms of yards after the catch, and the other one was just getting the ball deep. And when they've got one-on-one matchups, Jayden Daniels is attacking that. If defenses are able to take away those one-on-ones somehow, then it could be a problem for this offense in terms of the deep passing game. But now that you've got the emergence of Brian Thomas as a very, very good number 2, and that tandem of him and Neighbors is probably the best tandem in the country. Washington could have an argument as well. It's going to be really, really, you can't just focus on Malik Neighbors, because then Jayden will throw 3 touchdowns to Brian Thomas like he did against Ole Miss. And so that would be the big thing probably, but also the emergence of the running game. I mean, that was abysmal against Florida State. It's gotten more varied in terms of what they're doing schematically, going with some outside handoffs. It's not just sort of this very basic inside zone. And they are getting a lot out of Logan Diggs, who's been really, really good to this point.
Yeah, Logan Diggs is a big part of it. Like they've just got a well-rounded offense now. You have a quarterback who's playing well, who's mature, who's a run-pass threat, of course. You have multiple receivers now. Again, reminds you of 2019 when you had Chase and Jefferson and Terrace Marshall too. So you got multiple receivers you go to. You can't just focus on Malik Neighbors, because Brian Thomas is finally coming to his own. Logan Diggs is giving that running game, as Brian Kelly said. LSU's getting about 2/3 their yards, I would say, through the air on the season.
Oh, 60,
it's at least 60-40. But you got to have that running.
It's a heavily skewed to the offense.
Yeah, you got to have that running game, and he ran really well against Ole Miss. It showed great balance and runs hard, and I like the way he plays. And of course, not only about Mason Taylor, who's been kind of hurt at times, hadn't been maybe up to some of the standards we saw late last season, but he's still a very good player. And if he gets healthy, he's really good. So it's and the offensive line is playing well. Jayden's getting sacked sometimes, but they're passing a lot, and he's running around out there a lot. So he gets sacked sometimes. But I think overall you can't complain about the offense. We were having lunch in Oxford before the game, and Sheldon Mickles, one of our writers, overheard some LSU fans at another table saying, "Oh, Jayden's not that great. The Nussmeier is the best quarterback." I'm like, what do you people want? I mean, I can't really believe that. Of course, the most popular quarterback, I've always said at LSU, is the backup quarterback.
Right.
But he's playing at a Heisman candidate clip, and his odds, as we had a story on our website this week, his odds went down this week in the wake of the loss. But he's, I think, second in the nation in total offense. I mean, he's had a tremendous season. He's on pace to have the second best season of any LSU quarterback not named Joe Burrow, and that's a pretty high bar. But he's been tremendous this year, showing that maturity, poise, and grasp of the offense, and being a leader. And I think you can't say too much about the way he's played.
A few stats to back up just what Rab's saying in terms of, oh, really, he's going to have the second best. Like, he is on pace. And obviously, like, they had a huge game against Ole Miss, which had a bad defense, and so maybe it won't be quite this current pace. But at this rate, Jayden is going to end up with 4,800 total yards and 45 touchdowns.
That's pretty doggone good. Would be superseded only by, of course, one Joe Burrow, who threw for 60 touchdowns in 2019. I would just to piggyback on some of the things you guys are saying, I would say a lot of the credit should go to the offensive line as well. I think that it looked like they may be a liability coming out of the Florida State game, particularly the right side. I would have bet, frankly, I'm not a betting person, thankfully, but had I been, I would have bet a good amount of money that at some point this season we would have seen Miles Frazier go out of the lineup at right guard. Emory Jones then slides into right guard, which is sort of his natural position, and we would have seen the freshman Lance Hurd at right tackle. That hasn't happened, and it hasn't happened in large part because Miles Frazier, I think, has really come on in the last couple of games. One of the things, if you want to nitpick about the LSU offense, and believe me, we're not here to necessarily nitpick about the offense because, as we've said, it's humming about as well as an offense can hum, is maybe time of possession. I don't know how you handle this other than to say, this was certainly a big narrative coming out of the Ole Miss game. The second to last possession that LSU had, they ran 3 plays in 36 seconds, and they snapped the ball with 20 some odd seconds on the play clock. To put a little bit of a finer point on that, is there anything that LSU can do in the way of ball control or you gentlemen had both noted after the Arkansas game that LSU is going for it on fourth down more often. They're 4 of 8 right now. Should they go for it on fourth down more often? And the reason I bring that up is because LSU the average possession time is something like 30 minutes 16 seconds this year, which basically means the offense is on the field for half the time, the defense is on the field for half the time. You just as soon have that sort of suspect defense not be on the field as much if you can help it. Is there anything they can do either with ball control or for going for it on fourth down, even in places where you think maybe it's not the metrics would not tell you to go for fourth down? Maybe you really do need to take a couple of chances because the offense is so good and is more likely to go for it and make it on fourth down and maybe keep that LSU defense off the field.
It does seem like a good strategy to try to shorten the game in that regard. And obviously we've seen the game shortened by the new clock rules where the clock runs after first downs, except in the last 2 minutes of each half. So, but this offense is built more for the big play and the big gains that Wilson said that's what they were striving for. And now is to kind of revert back to last year was like a lot of 75-yard drives, 6, 8, 7 yards per play, short passes and runs. And maybe they could do a little more of that. I think it's a good idea to try to keep the ball out of the other team's hands. But they're at the same time they're so good. If you break a big play, you don't want to run out of bounds or fall down.
Don't take a knee. Yeah, that's true.
So it's kind of a catch-22. I think a little bit for this LSU offense. I think. Overall, that sounds like a good strategy. The best strategy, just go and score as much as you can. LSU's got to be thinking scoring 50 points Saturday. I mean, they have to be thinking that, right? I mean, you want to score on every possession, but it's really critical now.
I wouldn't want anything to happen that makes this offense revert back to what we saw last year. Because it has been explosive, that is a good thing. That is a good thing, and it needs to continue to do so. The one thing that maybe they could do a little bit more of, if you're talking about ball control and time of possession, is leaning on that run game a little bit more. Mm-hmm. Especially like against Arkansas, it was perplexing that they didn't, when Jayden was struggling early, and they were having a little bit of success in the run game, they just weren't going to it at all, that would probably be maybe the area where if you want to really sort of start to dictate time of possession, is still have those big plays in the passing game, but then, lean a little bit more heavily on Logan Diggs. He's shown that he can handle that. This offensive line is getting a push, and it's gotten better in the run game. And so that would probably be the one thing. On fourth down, and you're talking about that last possession against Ole Miss, the last, I guess, full
Second to
possession.
last. Yeah.
Second to last possession. that was a moment where, 5 minutes, you need to what's basically your 5-minute offense to drain the clock. They had that against Arkansas. Obviously, I think everybody would like to have seen them against Arkansas take that down all the way.
Yes.
All the way down. But it worked out in that game. And LSU, the play calling was a little bit perplexing on that third and 5.
That's right.
And they have Jayden roll out, and Malik Neighbors was open for a split second, and Jayden kind of started to cock his arm back and then pulled it down, and then Malik, there should have been a few different flags on that play.
Yes,
LSU should have gotten called for a pick on Kyron Lacey, and then Malik got just taken out of the play before Jayden was even tackled. Malik got shoved out of bounds. But it was interesting that there wasn't maybe the play call didn't feel like a moment where they were going to go for it on fourth down, even if it was 4-1 or 4th-and-2. So Brian Kelly has been aggressive at times, but not always this season. And in that moment, he said when it got to 4th-and-7, he said that there was really no consideration for even going for it on fourth down. I can understand why. I mean, you're on your own side of the field.
Sure.
That I can understand that reasoning. But maybe on third down, maybe between the conversations with all the coaches, say, hey, if you're getting to 4th and short, we're going for it. Maybe that influences the play calling a little bit different. But again, this is all extremely nitpicky. You scored 49 points. That should have been enough to win the game.
Very nitpicky. And the only other thing I would say, a lot of this has to do with the flow of the game, I think, too. If LSU's in a rhythm and they're not necessarily going tempo, but they're going to go a little faster, if that's because that's the rhythm that makes the offensive unit comfortable, well, don't mess with a good thing. By the same token, you wonder if there's a chance for you to bleed the clock here and there. Maybe you got a complete pass and you get to the line of scrimmage, you get it down to, 8 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds on the play clock before you take the next snap.
I don't think they're going to do that against Missouri, though. I really don't. I don't think they're going to try to, extend the time of possession. I think as coaches, they think that they've got a solution. They've got a way to do better. That this is going to be the week.
All gas, no brakes.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, speaking of which, before we put you guys on the spot with a game prediction, we'll get very specifically to LSU and Missouri, 11 a.m. Saturday. We've discussed the offense, the defense, matchups, all those types of things. But what's the number one thing? If you're Brian Kelly, what's the number one priority for your team going into this game? What's the number one thing you have to do, to be able to leave Columbia with a W?
You have to be able to get pressure on Brady Cook and disrupt their passing game that way, because it's not going to be by covering Luther Burden. Even bracket coverage, double coverage, it doesn't seem like it's going to be the solution. It's doing something different on the defensive front in order to create havoc. It's not even necessarily sacks. It's getting Brady Cook off of his spot. He's not a running quarterback. Part of the reason LSU struggled the last 2 weeks so much was they couldn't bring down KJ Jefferson. And then Jackson Dart was scrambling. He jumped over Andre Sam at one point. And because of bad tackling, you got a quarterback coming at you and you're lunging at his legs, you just go and hit him. But so that's what it is, I think, in this game in particular. It is getting pressure, because Brady Cook's got 37 yards rushing this year. If you can get him off his spot, we saw that work against Will Rogers, another sort of similar pocket passer quarterback in that regard. That's going to have to be the recipe in this game, is his havoc on the defensive line. That should be the strength of your defense. It needs to show up here.
And it really hasn't been except for one game. Rab, what do you see as the number one priority for LSU?
Score points. Score on every possession. A touchdown, a field goal. Back them up and see if you can make them punt. That would be something. Get a safety. I'm thinking back to that game in Missouri 3 years ago, 35-31. That's child's play. This is gonna be even higher scoring game than that. So the offense has just got to keep going, and obviously this is their goal to score on every drive. But this is really important right now, unless the defense can find its footing, which again is a challenge this week against Missouri.
I would say, we're all sort of taking the offense for granted that they're going to put up 38, 41, 45 points, and we're just we are taking that for granted. We're assuming that's going to happen because we've got no other reason to believe otherwise. if that's true, if the offense keeps humming, then I say the number one priority is to tackle. We discussed this over and over and over again. Look, if they tackle just a little bit better. The coaching staff counted 34 missed tackles by their count. Is that correct? 34 missed tackles against Ole Miss. I mean, geez, if you cut that down to, 10 missed tackles, maybe 20 missed tackles, then maybe you're talking about, you're talking about fewer third down conversions, and they get off the field, and that gives a chance for the offense to not feel like it has to score on every single possession, which they may still have to do anyway. So we'll get down to brass tacks. We've discussed a lot here. What happens on Saturday morning? Game prediction, Rab?
I think they're going to be going up and down the field, both teams. It should be, for fans, someone just tuning in who doesn't have a vested interest in LSU or Missouri, it's going to be an exciting game to watch. Great way to start the day. But I think LSU does get just enough to Missouri a couple of times, slow them down. Maybe, hey, Brady Cook's got to throw the interception sometime, right? Maybe that can be a pick six. I know Wilson's shaking his head. But no, really. I mean, the law of averages says eventually, he's gonna make it, turn the ball over. I've got LSU 44, Missouri 41, and it's with very little confidence that I say that. But I guess it goes back to I just figure LSU is going to beat Missouri. I've thought it since the offseason. So,
do you have more confidence in LSU winning or more confidence in betting the over?
Definitely the latter. Definitely the latter. I like you. I'm not. I don't bet on LSU because I cover LSU certainly. But the over is 64.
64 and a half.
Yeah, they're going to clear that like Mondo Duplantis going over the pole vault, going over the bar. It's going to be. I can't believe that. Obviously, Vegas doesn't want to make it like 70 or something like that.
That's right.
That's a big number, but wow.
Yeah, 64 and a half. LSU was a 6.5 point favorite to open. They're 5.5 points now. This is an early game on the road. Missouri's 5-0. They're a top 25 team with a pretty strong offense. Wilson, what do you say?
This is the best Missouri team they've had in a decade.
That's right.
Over there.
Yeah.
I hate that I'm going to pick LSU to win this game. That both of us are going to. I mean, not that I like. Oh, no, I just that like if we're all like leaning LSU, it feels like it's going to go the other way. I just have a hard time seeing this offense halfway through the season. A team with this offense halfway through the season have 3 losses.
Yeah,
I don't think Missouri is going to be quite as dynamic and explosive offensively as Ole Miss was. LSU is going to make them look probably a little bit better, but. There is one thing to look at here, though. Missouri's rush defense is 9th in the country right now. They haven't played somebody quite like LSU offensively, so I think Logan Diggs and Jayden Daniels will still have like a pretty good game. But that is going to have to be a lot out of Jayden Daniels because this is a Missouri pass defense that's quite susceptible.
That's right.
And so, but I think that Jayden and Malik and Brian Thomas, I just feel like they're going to make a play at the end to maybe win this thing. And I just have a hard time seeing the defense be 55 points bad for the second week in a row. So I'm going LSU. I also don't have a super high confidence meter on this one. And probably right on that, I think I said like maybe 43-40 kind of thing. It's going to come down to the wire. But I just feel like I said that this season was going to be probably like 10-2 or 9-3. Now that they've already picked up their second loss, I have a hard time seeing them get that third one already. So I'm picking LSU, but I feel weird about it.
To some degree, this is, you would think, well, maybe this is a good spot for LSU because, the proverbial back's against the wall. They've heard, and the defense has heard about, how rough they've had it and how sort of poorly they've been playing. So in many respects, maybe it makes a lot of sense to pick LSU, just sort of given the spot they're in and the feeling that maybe it's almost must win. It is must win.
That might have been something that we underestimated about Ole Miss last week coming off that Alabama game.
I think so, 100%. Yes, they had a golden opportunity against Alabama.
And Brian Kelly mentioned it this week how last year he said everybody was ready to burn the town down after they lost to Tennessee and they went on the road and beat Florida. It's not entirely surprising. It's surprising how LSU has gotten to this 3-2 record, with the defense being so bad. But it's not entirely surprising that they lost to Florida State and lost to Ole Miss on the road. And Wilson's prediction of 9-3 or 10-2 can still come true. They can still win any game on their schedule, and they can still lose a lot of them as well. But I'm with him. It's hard to picture a team with a truly elite offense being 3-3 at the midway point of the season.
It's one way or the other. It's going to be a show. I think in every single game we're going to watch from here on out. As Terrell Owens once said, get your popcorn ready because we will be nothing if not entertained. But anyway, that's where we'll wrap it up. We'll be here obviously throughout college football season. Stick with the Advocate. We're the #1 destination for LSU football coverage. Obviously, to subscribe to the Advocate, you go to theadvocate.com/subscribe. That's theadvocate.com/subscribe. Our LSU Sports Insider podcast, we'll be doing this throughout football season, throughout baseball season, women's basketball, men's basketball, the whole shooting match. And so by all means, tell a friend, tell a loved one, find LSU Sports Insider podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever finer podcasts are found. And also, while you're at the Advocate, sign up for the LSU Sports Insider newsletter. To do that, you go to theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. That's theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Perrin Keys. I'm the executive sports editor for Wilson and Scott. We appreciate you watching, and please tune in again. This has been the LSU Sports Insider Podcast.